As we promised in the last video, in this one we are going to explore Python's inbuilt operations for these common inbuilt objects, which are strings, arrays, and dictionaries. By the way, strings really means a string of characters. That's why, or actually symbols. That's why it's called a string. So let's get to exploring these functions that Python has and how these functions make it very easy in Python to do things that actually sometimes are very hard to do in other languages. So we're going to explore array and string functions. So let's get to the first one. So the first one, if you have an array, say this is an array that we have 1, 3, 12, 7, and 9, then there is a function called len. It basically gives you the length of the array. What is the length of the array? It basically says how many items does the array have. And how many items does it have? We can see it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, if you want the first item in the array, well, you know we have to use its index. And since the indexes go from 0, you use array 0, which will give us the first index. But Python has a very nice function to easily get the last index in an array. And to get the last index, you just put a -1. And as you can see, it gives you the last item in an array. All right, what if you wanted only certain items in the array, basically from here to here? Well, Python has a nice way of doing that. You basically specify a range of indexes. So it says, give me a range from 1 to 3. And in a range, usually, the last index is basically -1. So you will get the indexes here, 1 and 2. So what do we get 1 and 2? This is in 0, 1, and 2. So we got 3 and 12. Now, just sometimes you say, okay, I don't know how long the array is. I just want from here till the end. So in the range, if you do not specify the end, it gives you from the start till the end. Now 2 is actually the third element, so it's giving you all the elements, third element onwards. If you want to order the array, well, you use the sort function. If you want to get a reverse sort, meaning you reverse the order, well, you use a reverse sort. So that is how you use array functions. Now, if the array consists of all numbers, Python has some inbuilt functions that help you quickly do operations with numbers. For example, so if you have a set of numbers and you want the sum of all the numbers, you want to add all of them up, you just use the function SUMArray and it adds all these numbers up to give you that. If you have an array and you wanted to find out what is the maximum value of all the numbers in there, well, guess what? You use the function MAXArray. If you want the minimum value, you use the MINArray. How would you get the average, for example? You would do SUMArray and then divide it by the length of the array, and that's how you would get the average. And let's move on to see how Python handles strings. Well, here we have a string. We've defined it, we called it a string, and it has a sequence of characters, a long sentence. These are really characters, but we read it as a long sentence, say. Now, since this is a series of alphabet letters or characters or symbols, I mean, we really have an A, then we have a blank, and then we have a capital L and O, and so on and so forth. This really is a sequence just the way the array was. And sure enough, Python, you can use many of the functions we just saw, how to access an array with strings as well. So for example, if you want to know the length of the string, you use len a string, which will give you the length, how many characters it's got. By the way, blanks are included as characters. That's why it's 15. If you want the first character, you use the index a string 0, so you get the first character. If you want the last character, you use a string -1. If you want the characters, you want the range of characters, 2 through 5, which is really the characters because it's one more using the index, chars 3 through 5. So what are the characters 3 through 5? You have 0, 1, it's like 0, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you got lung. Now, if you want all the characters, 2 through n, which means the third character through the n, you get the long sentence. Strings, the other thing you have to do in strings, unlike numbers, you sometimes have to find if the string contains a certain pattern. So in this case, let's say we want to know, does this string contains the letters sent? So you can do that by doing a string.find. And what does it return? A string.find returns the index of where this pattern starts from. Now 7, remember, because it's 0 based, it really means the 8th character. So you see it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's where the pattern SENT starts from. Now what if we ask to find a pattern that doesn't exist? So for example, this XENT doesn't exist. So when you ask for a find and the characters don't exist, you get a -1 response, a negative index response. And that's how you know something does not exist in a string. There are other things you want to do with strings. So for example, if you have a string, you may want to convert all the letters to uppercase. So Python has a function called upper. So you can see it converted all these characters into a long sentence. If you want to convert all the letters to a lowercase, you see the L and the A and the S has now been converted to lowercase. Another way sometimes to find things is you want to know if a string starts with a certain pattern. So you can say, this is the function you use. You say, does a string dot starts with long? Well, it doesn't start with long because it's got an A, so it gives you false. But you can, and the same way you can say, does it end with something? You can say a string ends with NCE. Well, it does end with NCE, so it returns true. Sometimes, as you know, because we have strings and strings represent sentences, sometimes you don't want to deal with characters, but you want to deal with words. Well, to split a string into words or tokens, sometimes they are called, you use the word, Python has a function called split. So you say, you give it, assign a variable, you say words equals a string dot split. So what happens? It splits the string, and each word then gets put as a string element in a words array. And now that we know how to access arrays, you can access the last word, first word, etc. One final thing you need to do with words is, once you have the words, sometimes you may want to generate a pattern, and we will use this in later projects, is you want to join all the letters in this, all the words in this array, and use a pattern, whatever series of characters in between, instead of a blank, say. So here I said, use the 2 stars to join the words. And so that's what you get. You get a star star instead of the blank star star sentence. A very common function you want to do, or an operation you want to do on a string, is called a replace operation. So for example, if you wanted to replace all the E's in a string with some other character, you use the function replace. So you say a string dot replace, you specify which character you want to replace, and you specify which character you want to replace it by. And so this is how you get the result. So all the E's have been replaced by 2 slashes. We can use this later on, for example, to generate passwords and many other things later on. There are many more operations we can do with strings, because manipulating a series of symbols is very common in programming tasks. So, and we will cover those later. So things like, how do you format a string so you get the output you want? Regular expressions is a whole new topic. And the other thing that is very common is how to manipulate the date object and format date functions. We will cover those as we do a specific project, so you will understand how to do them a lot better, because if I cover them now, you may not really remember it when you have to use it. So it's best to cover them when we actually use it. What I do want to cover right now is the final thing of how do we manipulate dictionaries. Dictionaries basically consist of keys and the values associated with them. And sure enough, to get what the keys are and to get what the values are in a thing like this, we can, for example, convert, let's say, give me all the keys of this dictionary. I would like them in an array. So what you would do is you would say for, remember it's a repeat function, so it says for k, some variable in dictionary.keys. So what happens is it fetches, it's doing a repeat function to get the key, and then for each key it gets, it's going to replace it. It's going to assign the value of k for each key, and then sort of you can do your operations. In this case, what I am doing is I'm appending the value I get into this array, so I get the keys array. And this is what the keys array looks like. So it will give me the x, y, z, which are the keys of this array. And the same way you can do it with the values. You say dictionary.values, and you get the values array. All right, we are getting ready for our next video where we're going to use all the things we learned to learn how to turn data into visuals. See you in the next video.